Good day everyone, I am Krizel Aala from BSTM 1101 and I am here to discuss about eliminating risk or hazards in the tourism and hospitality industry. But before we proceed, let me first discuss what is risk and hazard.
What is risk? Risk is the chance that a person will be harmed or experience an adverse health effect or injury if exposed to a hazard. Risk can be classified into three. Like what you can see in the picture, the green one represents low risk or a hazardous condition is unlikely to cause accidents, and even if it does, the damage is low and can easily be treated. The yellow one indicates medium risk, or a hazardous condition can give an impact but not a serious one, or simply it is just in the middle range. And the red one indicates high risk, which means a hazardous condition may cause frequent accidents which may result in catastrophic equipment losses, injury, or even death. What is hazard? Hazard is any source of potential damage, harm, or adverse health effects on something or someone. Hazard can also be classified into three, and those are biological, chemical, and physical. Biological hazard, or commonly known as biohazards, can be any biological substance and microorganisms that could cause harm to humans. For example, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. The other one is chemical hazards. Chemical hazards are present when a worker is exposed to any chemical preparation in the workplace in any form, such as solid, liquid, or gas. And the last one is the physical hazards. These hazards are the most obvious. Also, despite their name, physical hazards aren't always something that you can see or touch. Physical hazards affect workers in extreme weather conditions or harmful working environments. Risk and hazards are confusing. But to better understand what is the difference between them, let me give you an example. So here is a match. And this match is considered as hazard because of the chemicals that are present in here. But how and when can we say that this hazard is already risky? So, if I light this match and I exposed myself by creating fire, then the risk is already present. So, that's how it goes. Hazards are the source of potential harm or damage, and risk is the probability of getting harmed upon exposing oneself in a hazard.
Now that the difference between the two is clear, let's come to think about this question. In the tourism and hospitality industry, will exposure to a hazard will always cause injury, illness, or other adverse health effects?
The answer is not necessarily. To answer this question, you need to know first what hazards are present and how the person is exposed with that hazard. For example, in the hospitality industry, at the kitchen where knife and other pointed tools are present, that is already a hazard in the workplace, but it doesn't mean that exposure to it will already cause injury as long as the worker or employee will practice proper handling of tools and equipment in their workplace.
Now that we know that exposure to hazard doesn't necessarily causes injury or illnesses, it is still crucial to know and identify the hazard and the possible harm it may bring to be able to minimize and eliminate the risk. And now, I know that you're already thinking, how can we do this? There is a process called risk assessment.
So what is a risk assessment? Risk assessment is a term used to describe the overall process or method where you, first, identify hazards and risk factors that have the potential to cause harm, or also called hazard identification. Hazard identification is the process of finding, listing and characterizing hazards. Second, analyze and evaluate the risk associated with that hazard or the risk analysis and risk evaluation. Risk analysis is a process for comprehending the nature of hazards and determining the level of risk. Risk evaluation is the process of comparing an estimated risk against given risk criteria to determine the significance of the risk. Lastly, determine appropriate ways to eliminate the hazard or control the risk when the hazard cannot be eliminated, or also called risk control. Risk control are the actions implementing risk evaluation decisions. It involves monitoring, re-evaluation, and compliance with decisions. To better understand this process, I will give you an example. Nowadays that we are facing pandemic, this COVID-19 is considered as a threat or hazard. If we got exposed to it, then we have high risk of having the virus which can lead to death. As an approach, upon knowing that the COVID-19 is the hazard and it cannot be eliminated easily, and the risk is extremely high, the tourism and aviation industry took efforts and determined appropriate ways to minimize the risk, like the approach of Cebu Pacific Airlines to make sure that the passengers and employees are safe. They increased their safety and disinfection measures. In short, risk assessment is a thorough look at your workplace to identify those things, situations, processes, and etc. that may cause harm, particularly to people. After identification is made, analyzing and evaluating how likely and severe the risk is, to be able to decide on what measures should be in place to effectively eliminate or control the harm from happening. Now, let's talk about how can we eliminate the hazard in the tourism and hospitality industry. There are main ways to control a hazard, and this can be used in the tourism and hospitality industry. It includes elimination, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment or the PPE. Let's focus first on the elimination. Elimination is the process of removing the hazard from the workplace, or if not possible, just replacing or substitution of hazardous materials or machines with less hazardous ones. For example, in hotel, replacing electricity-powered light bulb with a solar-powered light bulb will do. Next is the engineering controls. This includes designs or modifications to plants, equipment, ventilation systems, and processes that reduce the source of exposure. The other one is administrative control. This controls the way the work is done, including timing of work, policies and other rules, and work practices such as standards and operating procedures. Under it are the training, the housekeeping, and equipment maintenance and personal hygiene practices. And lastly, the personal protective equipment or the PPE. This is the equipment worn by individuals to reduce exposure such as contact with chemicals or exposure to noise. For example, for those who were working at the hospitality industry such as hotels, the use of PPE like gloves, masks, and etc. is important, especially for those who are assigned at the housekeeping department to avoid exposure with chemicals.
Can risk be controlled even if hazard is not eliminated?
The answer is yes. Like what I have said a while ago, my example about the COVID-19. So, COVID-19 is a hazard that is not yet eliminated, but the risk of having it is minimized or controlled through the use or implementation of different strategies. And in line with this, I'm sure we're already thinking how to control risk. Most risk management techniques follow the same basic 5-step model. And those are identify, analyze, prioritize, treat, and monitor. Now, let's focus first on identifying the risk. After identifying the hazard present in the workplace, this one has the potential to be the most difficult as we don't always know what we are looking for. Risks have a great deal of uncertainty, and it can be difficult to pinpoint what exactly would happen. Like what many people says, expect the unexpected. Though this part is hard, this is the most important because if you will not be able to identify, you cannot eliminate or control the risk or even get to the next step, which is analyzing the risk. So, analyzing the risk is the process of knowing more about the risk. Analyzing a risk can help you identify the potential severity of a risk so that you may complete the next step of prioritizing the risk. Prioritizing risk can help you allocate your resources to risks that pose a larger threat on your business as opposed to smaller threats with less severe consequences. The one who have a larger threat should be the top priority rather than those with less threat. No buts, no ifs. Next is treating the risk. This step obviously varies. The strategies depends on the level of risk and its type, and its implementation, including the time frame and approach, might vary. After treating the risk, we will now go with the last step, which is monitoring the risk. This is the last but the continuous process. Exactly what it sounds like. In this step, you keep an eye on the risk so that you may respond and react in a timely and efficient manner. The aim of the risk assessment process is to evaluate hazards, then eliminate that hazard or minimize the level of its risk by adding control measures as necessary. In the tourism and hospitality industry, risk assessments are very important as they form an integral part of an occupational health and safety management plan. Knowing that the safety of the passengers and guests, as well as the internal customers, should always be the top priority of this industry, having enough knowledge about risk assessment is important. With this, awareness about the hazards and risk present in the workplace is created, those at risk were identified, plans and strategies are created, and injuries or illnesses, even death, are prevented.
And that's all for eliminating risk and hazards in the tourism and hospitality industry. I hope you learned a lot, and goodbye for now. Again, I am Krizel from BSTM 1101. Thank you.